I'm here today with Carrie Newcomer. Carrie's a songwriter, recording artist, performer, and educator. She is now releasing both a new album and a new book, both titled Until Now, and supporting them both with a new concert coming out. She's been described as a prairie mystic by the Boston Globe and one who asks all the right questions by Rolling Stone magazine. Carrie has 19 nationally released albums, including Until Now, The Point of Arrival, and The Beautiful Not Yet. Carrie has released 3 books of poetry and essays: A Permeable Life, Poems and Essays, The Beautiful Not Yet, Poems and Essays and Lyrics, and Until Now, Poetry by Carrie Newcomer. You can learn more about all of that at carrienewcomer.com. So Carrie, it's so wonderful to get back together with you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me on the program.
Well, it's always such a pleasure to chat. I mean, you and I have so many interests and friends in common that it always takes up plenty of conversation if we just did that alone.
I know. Before we start the interview, we always have like a lot of interview before.
Yes,
How are you
exactly.
doing? How's it going? And tell me more about this project. And so it's really nice. It's nice to be talking with you today.
Well, since we haven't had a chance to see each other in person,
Well,
being through this media is the best as it gets, right?
and it's been a wonderful program. Again, thanks for inviting me to be part of it. But yeah, I think that idea of creative community has really been so important it's always important, but in the last year and a half with the pandemic, being able to do new and creative ways of staying in connection with one another is like so important.
I mean, thank goodness we do have this kind of technology, right? Because, if we were limited to just in-person things, when you can't do in-person things, then, oh my goodness, the whole feeling of isolation and loneliness and frustration would have been, at least for me, a whole couple orders of magnitude greater.
Yeah, yes. And, you know, in terms of my work, my last tour was March 6th of 2000.
Wow.
So I've done one live show since then, but I've been able to do quite a bit of online performance and events and workshops. And that's a whole new animal. It's a new
Yes.
creative animal. And so I'm really grateful for that. And it is new and creative community.
Well, we'll talk more about some of that in a moment. But for people who may not be as familiar with your work, which there probably aren't that many still out there, but please, if you
Sure.
could, provide a little bit more background than what I touched on.
Well, I'm a singer-songwriter, and a poet, and as you said in the opening, I've done several recording projects, and um, my life, I guess the best way to put it is my favorite game when I was a little girl was a game called Making Something. What are you doing, Carrie? Well, I'm making something. And I was making songs. I was writing little stories. I was always creating something. And all these years later, I'm still just inordinately happy when I'm making something. And I do believe in the power and in, I don't know, the contribution of the arts, literature, music, dance, um, all the arts. And particularly now, when we're asking a lot of big questions.
So typically when I'm interviewing an author only, I'll ask them, well, tell us about how you get your first book deal, because that's usually so fascinating. But in your case, kind of like, how did you get your first record deal, or what was your first big break, as an
Yeah.
entertainer?
Well, it is interesting. I started playing music, um, you know, coffee houses, restaurants, bars, bowling alleys, wherever wherever I could play, little festivals. I did that when I was going through school. I went to school for visual art because I was chalking up all the safe and secure professions you could chalk up, like visual art, check, folk singing, check. Um, but um, when I finished college, it was like music was really where my heart was and really where what I needed to follow. And I had no idea what that would mean, being a young woman in the middle of the Midwest, you know. I wasn't living in one of the music meccas. I wasn't living in Nashville or LA or New York and Boston. I mean, I was, kind of in the middle of the Midwest. So I worked locally and started expanding out and made a couple albums. Back then, sent them out to radio stations. Um, and I found out that I was getting a lot of airplay in particular stations, which was wonderful to find out. And so I thought, well, maybe there's listeners in that community for me. So I started traveling to these different places. Um, and after a while, I was selling enough out of the back of my car as a traveling folk singer. Um, and hopefully because of the quality as well, I began working with Rounder Records, just a wonderful acoustic label, and they put out, I think, 11 of my albums. That was a long run, much longer than most people work with a record company. So, so they really believed in what I was doing and continued to put out my work. But yeah, it was that was probably one of those starting point moments when that first record deal came in.
Oh, I can imagine.
But there was all that work that happened beforehand and all that networking and all that community gathering. And I always had to be really creative about it. I feel like I relate to really young artists right now in terms of how they're getting their work out there. Since I wasn't in one of the music meccas and I couldn't do it through the normal, the pipeline that was happening at the time, I had to be really creative. I had to, find my own ways of sending out little balloons and messages into the world. And, young artists now, they're looking at the internet, they're looking at all kinds of creative ways of letting people know that they're making art and they'd like to share it. So, yeah, it was a long and winding, but like, I think I was really just born to sing. And so I just kept singing. And
Well, good for you. And you kind of, showed us a great example of an early stage entrepreneur, at the early stages of your career.
Yeah, I guess I was. And my husband, Robert, is also just such a creative soul. There's nothing more fun than a good idea for my husband, Robert Midas. And he's been so supportive all along of what I've been doing since the time we first got together, with interesting creative ideas as well.
Cool, cool. So I know one of the things you've been doing more recently is with our friend Parker Palmer, The Growing Edge. Can you tell folks a little bit about that project?
I love working with Parker Palmer. I just have to tell you, it is one of the great joys of my life. And I met Parker several years ago, many years ago. I actually wrote him and asked him if he would write the liner notes for one of my albums when I was still with Rounder. They used to do old-fashioned liner notes, about, and so I sent a message to him, and I didn't know whether he would respond or not. He responded right away and just was so generous and so lovely, wrote the liner notes, and we started this conversation that has continued and expanded in all kinds of creative ways. We have a spoken word and music program, two of them that we've created together, with pianist Gary Walters. The Growing Edge project kind of grew out of just this ongoing conversation between the two of us about what's at the growing edge for each one of us personally, for the communities we are living in, politically, vocationally. There questions and topics that we kept coming back to, and it seemed like a conversation would be fun to invite more people into. So that became the Growing Edge Project, and it's we do retreats, but not right now during COVID. Um, but also a podcast called The Growing Edge, and um, been been enjoying very much being a co-host with Parker.
Well, it's been wonderful, and a lot of people have really enjoyed them a lot. So thank you for getting together to do that. Each one of us has our own creativity, but when there are two of you together, like in that instance, to play off each other, then I think it's even more. 1 + 1 is greater than 2.
Yeah, and I think also creatively, when you meet someone that just so resonates personally and creatively, that's not every day. It doesn't happen all the time. And so I consider it a great gift. And yeah, and we're still continuing this conversation and continuing doing creative projects.
Good, good, good. So let's get to your new project, Until Now. So what is it like to simultaneously release an album and a book while we're still in a pandemic?
Wow. Now, that's a big question. Who knew that a year and a half later we would still be struggling the way we are with um, being able to go out in public and share art and performance and all kinds of things. Who knew that we would be here? But we are. But I still again that call to create, and also there's a lot in this album and a lot in this book about being in process um, and some of the questions I think that have come up for myself, but I think also for a lot of us during this pandemic. Um, you know, what is it like to be in process? Is it okay to be in process? I mean, because this is not done. I mean, I think all of us, it's been this ongoing unfolding. You know, we started, we rolled up our sleeves and, got things organized, um, settled in for a long haul at a certain point. Um, there's a lot in this album about loss and being in process with grief.
Hmm,
Also, I think, where do we find hope?
hmm,
Where do we find hope in hard times? And how do we ground ourselves in something that's strong and centering and sustaining when when there's so much flying around us every day that distracts or um, could lead to despair. So like I said, there's a lot in this album that I think, like I said, I was experiencing the questions I was really wrestling with. But I think that many of us, it felt like a good time to do a new project. So I did, and not really knowing if being able to go out and fully tour these to this companion book and CD. In some ways, you know, I was hopeful, but not really sure if that would happen. But it still felt like the right thing to make art, right now. Um, and it was just lovely when we recorded the musicians that we were recording together in a studio called Airtime Studio, and it's kind of actually an artist retreat, and everyone stayed there, and it was just after everyone had been vaccinated.
hmm.
So it was one of the first times we all got together in a room and could make music together. It was joyous, and I think that there's a feel of that too. This sense of ah, doing what we were born to do, and together. I, you know, so yeah, it's been a really interesting writing period, writing for these projects, actually making the book and the CD, and now it's very interesting in how it will come out into the world. And that's still some things are clear, but some things are unclear.
Sure, sure. That's the way a lot of folks are at right now. I speak to a lot of pastors that, are trying to figure out, okay, how do we deal with all of this in September, right? I mean,
It's
school, same thing.
it's true, and again, kind of going back to the both the album and the book of poetry. There's a lot about the first poem in the new poetry book is called "Learning to Sit with Not Knowing."
Wow, that's timely.
Uh, y- and because we've all had to learn how to just be with uncertainty, and we're human beings, and that's not always comfortable for us. So how do I be with uncertainty? How do I learn to sit with not knowing? Um, be kind to myself in that process. Um, do what I can in this moment. So yeah, the first poem is about uncertainty.
Is there a particular theme that threads throughout the book and the album?
I think basically what have just been talking about, this idea of being in process, that living with uncertainty, being in process, what is sustaining, what is life-giving, what really uh, connects and fosters resilience in a time like this. Um, so, and there's a song about my dog, but
Good.
which again might be really timely in the pandemic, as many of us have really spoiled dogs now.
Definitely. So, would you mind like reading a poem maybe from the book? Would that be okay?
Sure. Yes, I'd love to. Thanks. This is one called What You Won't Hear on Cable News. I want to tell you what you won't hear on cable news. About a young woman in an airport who was so exhausted and harried by hours of delay and wrangling an overtired toddler that when her little boy finally and completely melted down and planted himself on the floor, she sat down beside him and started to cry. I want to tell you about 5 random women who immediately flowed in from all directions. One pulled out a little toy from her purse. One offered a snack or to get something to drink. One called the child honey, wiped his nose with a tissue, and offered another one to the grateful mother. And the one who asked if it was all right to walk hand in hand with the child, right there at the gate, close by and always, always in view. I want to tell you about the man who makes soup and bread and then gives it away, and the nurse who held his hand when he was breathless and afraid. I want to tell you about my neighbor who drives around all winter with snow chains in his car just in case someone needs help. I want to tell you about all the people I meet who keep extending themselves and braving the risk of being told it's none of their business, who offer a hand or a bit of encouragement, a couple of bucks, or will walk a fussy child around the gate because it's the kind thing to do. I want to tell you that the world still turns every single day on an axis of goodness and unexpected grace that shows up without fanfare and often when we least expect to find it.
Beautiful. Wow. Again, how timely, set of thoughts that is.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I
Now,
appreciate it.
are there songs and poems that go together between the album and the book, or are they completely separate?
Well, I usually, when I put out my books of poetry, often I do it as companion pieces because usually my songs start with poetry. If you ask a songwriter, if you ask like 11 songwriters how they write, you'll get 14 ways to do it, maybe 15. Um, But my process most often starts with, um, you know, poetry
Hmm.
and different kinds of prose writing. Uh, but really most often poetry. So there'll be a relationship. I have a song called "Learning to Sit with Not Knowing" that came directly out of that poem, and even grabbing a couple lines here and there. So sometimes it's direct, and then sometimes the poems are the process for me thinking about a topic, a thought, um, something that a question that I'm mulling. So and it may not be completely direct, the link between the two, um, but it's how I got to the song. Um, and it was interesting this particular time around that songs came harder and poetry flowed more
Interesting.
during the last year and a half. Um, which is interesting because yes, I love, as a songwriter, I love putting language and music together. A song, I mean, there's something so compelling about that in a song, everything the music is saying is backed up by the language, and everything the language is saying is totally entwined in the music. And I love that so much. Um, but, for some reason during this pandemic, the songs came harder.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
came, but the poetry uh, was more of where I was processing it
Hmm.
all. And so, like I said, there may not be a direct link as there is with the poem "Learning to Sit with Not Knowing," which is a really direct link to a song of the same name. Many of the poems, um, you know, they're the kind of work that I was doing that was informing the songs
Interesting. Interesting.
that that led the way to the songs.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what are the release dates for the book, for the album, and for the concert?
Now, the first concert is on a online platform called Mandolin, and that's on August 29th. And I'm so excited about it. Right after we finished recording, the entire band and myself, we filmed a concert right there in the studio. So, the energy of just coming off of the recording process is really there. Um, and I just loved the musicians I worked with on this project. They're all excellent musicians. I mean, really exceptional, brilliant musicians, but also just great people with, yeah, great sensibility and senses of humor. And I loved it. Um, so the concert happens on August 29th, which is a Sunday, and you can, check out tickets. Also, I'll be doing a meet and greet afterwards with an interview with Judith Valente, this wonderful author you probably already know about. Um, so that's happening. The book of poetry and the CD street date you can pre-order now already, but the street date is September the 10th.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's when it is in the world.
Right. 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 Good. Well, that's wonderful. I mean, we're right up coming up to those dates, so
Yeah.
we're going to be
And
looking forward
also,
to it.
we did release the first single on Spotify and Apple Music. It's called "A Long Way Up," and there's also a video that you can find on YouTube and on Facebook. So so yeah, the first single is already out.
Good. Good. And I mean, in terms of subsequent concerts, is that all up in the air, or do you have a whole rollout plan either for in person or online?
I will be doing both. I'll be
Okay.
doing a kind of a hybrid of things. Right now, you know, the places, the theaters and the communities where I'm playing I had a very intense, very busy touring season coming up, are really weighing safety measures. And I feel pretty strongly, I feel very strongly that um, full safety measures should be in place for every concert I'm I'm involved with.
Sure.
Um, for the safety of not just myself, but everyone in the audience, for the staff. I just think that's um, in terms of where we are right now,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
wisest way to go. So right now, most of my tour is in place, and as we have been doing for the last year and a half, we'll just take it week by week.
Sure.
Um, but right now, it's all looking pretty good, and um, yeah, and like I said, I think it helps having really you know yes, really strong safety measures in
Absolutely.
place. In place.
Absolutely. So we mentioned Mandolin a couple of times, which is a new platform that Robert's launched, which sounds incredibly exciting and valuable, particularly,
Yeah,
again, given our times. Can you explain what that is to folks?
yeah. At the beginning of the pandemic, Robert was watching me as a musician and a performer, trying to continue to somehow, bring their music and art into the world and share it, to create a musical community. And we were all doing Facebook and things like that, trying to work with Zoom, um, but these platforms were not created for music. They just weren't created for music, and so there was a lot of problems with them, and quality issues, but also just a whole series of things that, like I said, they just weren't created for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
Um,
it's easy
and
to see.
and so he had this idea to start a company that um, was specifically for a music concert platform, and with high quality sound and audio and visuals, with functions that could really feel like community chat functions, um, uh, you know, now kind of meet and greet functions. I mean, they've done so much with this the platform to just create a really wonderful experience for people. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of be the mandolin guinea pig. That he'd have a new idea and said, "Why don't you do it, Carrie?" And
You've been the
I said,
alpha tester and the beta tester and
I,
the rollout, tester.
"That was me, beta tester, tester for mandolin," um, and I'm very grateful for it. And I was able, I said, to do a lot more performance and online work than many musicians had access to. Um, yeah, and it was a whole different art form, and I think that was one of the things that became clear right away, is that this is a different art form. If recording was apples and live performance, in-person performance was oranges, streaming was kind of kiwi. I mean, um, it was a new animal, a new art form, and it took a little while to find my center of gravity with it. I think a lot of us finding our center of gravity. Um, but uh, one of the things that was really exciting for me, and maybe not so surprising, that the spirit of music, the spirit that happens in musical community, um, it travels farther and wider than we ever thought was possible. It's not, spirit is not confined to a room or a screen. That spirit can connect in all kinds of ways, is it beyond what we imagined. So that was a great discovery. Um, and we had a lot of fun. And this fall, I will be doing some more mandolin shows online. And people, they're kind of on my touring page on my website. You can see the in-person ones and the ones that are online. But yeah, mandolin has just grown, and it was the streaming platform for the Telluride Festival this year and for
Wow.
Rocky Grass, and they're just doing all kinds of wonderful things. So yeah, it's been fun to be, um, you know, like I said, alpha, beta tester, and watching this thing grow. Like I said, my husband Robert, he's a great guy, and of course, I think he's a great guy, and I'm married to him, and I'm still married to him. And that's another thing about COVID. It's like, wow, I'm a touring artist. We had never been together that much in our entire relationship. After like a month and a half, I'd been home longer in a stretch than I'd been home in a stretch in 25 years. It was, and then we found out we really like each other, and we still laugh at each other's jokes, and and we could be there for one another, on the hard days, and really support one another in creative endeavors like mandolin, like this album, and like this book. Um, that was a wonderful thing to find out too. That we still laugh at each other's jokes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know you're right in the throes of introducing all of this, but is there anything in the future that you're able to at least give us a glimpse of?
Well, right now, I one of the things that happens for me is I write a lot, and so as soon as I finish an album, I'm writing for the next one.
Mhm.
Um, but you know, this one, I'm still kind of in that creative process with it, of getting it out into the world, and I'm kind of focusing right here, in the online shows, the in-person touring that can happen, and talking with wonderful, wonderful people like yourself, uh, letting people know that it's here.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to keep you busy for a while, and it's got to be a big push, to do all this at once and on multiple platforms, so to speak. So I'm sure
Yeah,
it's going to be all consuming.
yeah, and I think too, I have to say in terms of this new book, I think, and the CD, um, I think there's that idea of we're in this together, of human condition, is really a big part of this album, and part of why I'm really looking forward to putting it out into the world, because I think that's something we need to remember right now, that we are all in this together, and that we are connected, and it is complicated. Um, I've said for a long time, love is simple, people are complicated, um, but it is complex, and we're all being asked to be better people than we ever thought we would have to be. Um, how do you rise to that each and every day, um, to make your corner of the world, um, a little kinder place, like in the poem? That you won't hear that on cable news. But people are doing it, and they're doing it every day. Um, yeah, they just don't always get, front page above the fold. It's
Exactly, exactly.
so I think part of my excitement is about getting this particular work out is just a sense of, you know, aren't we all in this together? Aren't we connected? Aren't we human? Aren't we funny? I mean, um, people are incredibly funny. I have, and I'm funny. I think there's a little bit of laughing at myself in both CD and book, which I think is a pretty important part of the process, to being able to, um, you know, yes, to be able to laugh at yourself, have compassion for being in process.
So carrienewcomer.com is the website. You can find out about all of it there.
Yes. And mandolin.com, if you want to check out the shows there, and there'll be information about my particular show on the 29th of August. Yeah, carrienewcomer.com is the website. Also, I'm on Facebook and Instagram and all that. I do the whole thing. So I hope folks will check it out and join the conversation. That's one of the things I think I've appreciated about Facebook. I have a Facebook page, and I actually was a little reticent to get one. And but then someone said to me, well, it's not so much about you, Carrie, but it's about the topics you write about. And then, then the Quakerly part of myself said, oh, okay, I can do that.
Sure.
I can do that. And that would actually be quite lovely. So I've been very touched by the conversations that happen in those online mediums. So yeah, hope folks will visit.
Good, good. Well, congratulations on all the new work, all the past work, but all the new work too. It's very exciting and really glad to see it. And I hope it all goes well for you.
Would you like one more poem?
Sure, sure.
All right, one more poem. How about learning to sit with not knowing?
Oh, good. Yes.
Since we were talking about it. I'm learning to sit with not knowing, even when my restless mind begins jumping from a worried what next to a frightened what if to a hard-edged and impatient why aren't you already there? I'm learning to sit and listen, to pat myself on the knee, lay my hand on my heart, take a deep breath, and laugh at myself, to befriend my mistakes, especially the ones that show me how I most need to change. I'm learning to sit with whatever comes, even though I'm a planner, because so much of this life can't be measured or predicted, because wonder and suffering visit when we least expect and rarely in equal measure. I'm learning to sit with what I might never know, might never learn, might never heal. I'm learning to sit with what might waltz in and surprise me, might crash into my days with unspeakable sorrow or uncontainable delight. I am learning to sit with not knowing.
Well, isn't that a description of today's life, isn't it?
Well, it is for me.
It's great. I mean, it just hits the nail on the head.
Well, thank you so much for you asked such wonderful questions. We have spoken together before, and I really appreciate being on the program. And you asked such wonderful questions. So,
Well,
thanks
you
for
put out
having
such
me.
wonderful material that it's easy to, dive into these rich conversations because of that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, Carrie, thanks again, and best wishes with the new album and the new book and the concerts too.
Thank you. Thank you. And see you soon.